Let's move on to our first guest here. He's a friend of the show, back here at Bold. His name is Galen Druke. He's producer and reporter at 538.
Hey, how's it going? Good to be with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us. So, Galen, 538 has an interactive digital forecast online for the midterm elections, and it's stating a 5 and 6 chance that the Democrats are going to win the House, and a 2 and 3 chance that the Republicans keep the Senate. And what influenced these results?
Well, there are a lot of factors that go into the results, but one of the most important things is generic ballot polling. Essentially, you ask people across the country if they would vote for a Republican or a Democrat for Congress, not tied to any one specific race. Right now, in the generic ballot polling, Democrats are up about 8 to 9 points, which is a very good national environment for Democrats. That's reflected, obviously, in the House, with Democrats having a pretty good shot of taking the majority in the House. The Senate is a different story, and we can get into some of the structural issues there.
So how much of this is just sort of the natural wave of
I was about to ask that question. I was wondering the same thing.
It's almost
history,
formulaic,
right? Exactly.
Yeah, because I just hear the left always saying, like, this is Trump getting his due. And I'm like, this is like history where who is ever in the White House, the other party tends to do well in the midterms.
The pendulum swings. And, you said the left is talking about this as if Trump is getting his due. I'm sure the right felt that Obama was getting his due in 2010, right?
Fair point.
When you're not happy with what the president is doing, you vote. And obviously, turnout is not as high in the midterms as it is in a presidential year, historically. And so whichever side has the energy can really sway the election. There are instances in which the midterms have not produced significant swings. We know in 2004 because of 9/11. We know in 1998 because of the Monica Lewinsky affair, trial, et cetera. And in other cases as well. But in large part, yeah, you're right. When a newly elected president hits his first midterms, the picture usually doesn't look good.
So, Galen, polling got a really bad rep in 2016.
Did it?
I mean, at
Not
least,
for me,
at
not
least,
with me.
At least according to most pollsters, got the 2016 elections completely wrong, including 538 and including Nate Silver.
They were less wrong than others.
They were less wrong, but they were wrong. But they were wrong.
Expressing the probability of something as, a 30% chance that something happens doesn't mean that when it does happen, you got it wrong. It means that the unlikelier thing happened. Like, why do you have health insurance or car insurance or homeowners insurance?
Of course.
Unlikely things happen all the time.
I understand, and I was going to particularly ask about the coverage that we have in the media about horse race politics, right?
For sure.
A lot of people actually think that, and if you look at the coverage, particularly before the midterms and before an election season, an overwhelming majority of the coverage is dedicated to who has the most likely chance to win this, and it's the contest rather than the actual policies and the consequences of those policies and the candidates themselves. So do you think some people argue that this is actually detrimental to, the media and for the country?
So, the horse race is a lot of what 538 specifically does. And the reason that we cover polls and the horse race the way that we do is because we take the position that, in large part, the media does not do a good job of covering polls, explaining uncertainty, explaining probability. And so we kind of take on the role of trying to do a smarter, more thorough, and responsible job of covering the polls. Covering the horse race is not bad. There's obviously a market for it. And if consumers of news want to hear about it, then there are going to be outlets that allow them to hear about it. What is not great is when non-data literate or non-polling literate media organizations or journalists talk about polls in irresponsible ways that don't allow consumers to understand the horse race in a realistic sense.
So how does the polling determine intensity? Because I think that was part of what was missed in 2016 in terms of propensity to actually turn out. And as I understand it, in midterms, it tends to be conservatives or Republicans who have a higher propensity, higher intensity to vote. Did you bake that into the analysis here?
So in 2016, the national polls were not very far off. In fact, the polling error in 2016 nationally was less than it was in 2012. It was just off in the direction of the less favored candidate, right?
Because it
in
was a close
2016.
election. Yeah.
It was a close election. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by about 2 points. Polls were largely off in places in the upper Midwest. And yes, you can go and look at the modeling there and see who turned out and who didn't. We know that in places like Milwaukee, the African-American community didn't turn out like it had in years past. And so, turnout does matter, and polls will and can be off. That's nothing new. That happens all the time. When it comes to 2018, you're right that the kind of conventional wisdom about midterms is that older, whiter, more educated voters turn out, and that tends to favor Republicans. However, when there is a Republican incumbent in the White House, that slant is less strong and can even be completely eliminated in some cases. So I would say even if in 2010 and 2014 you saw in your state or your district that there was a strong turnout for Republican, on the Republican side, don't expect that this time around. I mean, just even looking historically, there's not a good reason to expect that when there's an unpopular incumbent Republican in the White House. But also, as you know right now from looking at the generic ballot polling, how people are planned to vote, right? And so you should look at that and base your assumptions off of turnout based on that.
How do you account for, and I believe they talked about this particularly in 2016, the voter that, are they telling the truth? Right? Are they, or is that just kind of one of the errors that are inherent in polling?
I mean, I don't know what incentives people would have to lie to pollsters. I mean, it's not something, I don't think it's an issue that we have.
Isn't the concern that some Trump voters don't feel comfortable, that they feel like even the way the questions are worded, just overall in their, just even verbalizing they voted for Trump versus just when you're by yourself, you can pull that lever or punch the ballot or however you do it.
I mean, again, so the polls, at least national polls, were not particularly off in 2016. So we don't have any good evidence that people were telling pollsters that they were going to vote for Hillary Clinton and then they actually voted for Trump. Also, in the Republican primary, there's no evidence at all that people said that they were going to vote for somebody else and then actually voted for Trump. In a lot of the, primary states in 2016, Trump underperformed his polls. So, we don't, and even, people talked about the Bradley effect in 2008 and 2012. With people being too embarrassed to admit that they wouldn't vote for an African-American candidate for president, but then actually not voting for him. Well, again, that wasn't the case, right? People don't have a particularly good incentive to lie to pollsters, I don't think. And historically, it's not been much of a challenge in the polling arena.
Right. And I have actually a general question for people watching this. What do you, for the polling skeptics that are still a bit scarred by what happened in 2016, that everybody said this was going to happen, and all the pollsters and all the professionals, what do you want them to know about polling?
I want them to know that oftentimes the likelier things happens, and oftentimes the less likely thing happens. For example, if you're a Democrat and you hope that the Democrats take the Senate, right now there's a 1 in 3 chance that Democrats take the Senate, right? You probably believe, hey, that 33% thing could happen. But, when it happened in 2016, when the 30% thing happened, Trump winning happened, you thought it was crazy. Just believe that, things with a 33% chance of happening happen all the time, and they happened in 2016, they could happen in 2018.
So you're saying there's a chance, to quote Dumb and Dumber.
I am saying that unlikely things happen all the time, and that's why just in your your daily regular life, you have insurance. People who watch baseball know that great hitters only hit the baseball about 30% of the time, right? Just embrace uncertainty, and that just because unlikely things happen doesn't mean you should throw out the scientific method and stop believing in data.
Embrace uncertainty. That sounds bold.
Yeah, and it sounds like a good life motto too, actually.
Absolutely.
Yes. Awesome.
Good way
Thanks
to
for the
end.
wisdom.
Absolutely. I try my best.
Thanks, Galen.
Thank you.
Make sure to check out their interactive there on 538, looking at the congressional elections for all you data wonks out there.